Then we started, thinking about a vision for a net zero energy system. Then, in the sense that there are many net zero is not just about the sectoral target, but there will be rapid or very interesting institutional changes that will happen in a net zero kind of future. So all of this work, as I said, happened just before and few months after Secretary Kerry and Mr. Alok Sharma, who was the presidency of the COP, visited India. A lot of this was kind of responding to the global debate. Then we started, saying that, well, it is important to respond to the global debate, but it is also critical for India as a country to understand that if it wants to achieve a net zero future, what will it take in terms of domestic actions to achieve net zero? And today's presentation is going to focus on the domestic actions and the sectoral strategies, that India needs to think about. So when we're looking at the net zero debate, we're looking at many different perspectives. One is the responsibility. Responsibility is about, historical emissions, but it is also about future emissions. For example, if you look at China's future emissions, even given their net zero and peaking target, they're actually very, very big. And then the question comes of feasibility, that whatever target India thinks about 2050 or 2070, now what is the notions of feasibility around the target? What can be achieved and what cannot be achieved? Then the notion of economic cost. When we interact with policymakers in India, the notion of economic cost is very real, that they do want to understand which sectors will be hit and what does it really mean for in terms of the developmental impacts of any such stringent target. Then some concepts of differentiation and opportunity. What is really the opportunity in this transition? So we are viewing this, net zero debate through many different lenses. And this particular sectoral strategies work focuses mostly on the feasibility and economic costs of thinking about sectoral strategies, some domestic actions within India. And through this, focusing on this work, we have recently released something which is about sectoral energy transitions. This was a working paper for public comments. And as I said, this has been informing the government in the policy. So what we have done in this analysis, we have essentially tried to analyze the implications of different net zero years and different peaking years, so kind of different combinations. And along with these, some kind of breakthrough technology, as we call it. Breakthrough simply means these technologies have been debated for some time without much progress, but their availability could really change the game. So the two technologies we have thought about or we figured would be important is CCS and hydrogen. So now we have all these different combinations of various peaking and net zero years and technology availability. And why this is this kind of formulation is interesting, because this is not really a usual least cost formulation that we see mostly in the literature out there. This is a formulation which is much more real to sort of how policymakers are thinking about it. Because when we are interacting with these policymakers, the question everybody is thinking about, okay, what should be the net zero year and what should be the peaking year? So this is just a very sort of simplified representation of that reality, which helps us in really choosing, what could be the peaking and net zero year for India. So coming to some of the interesting results. Now, in terms of emissions, I want to say that I'm going to present results more on sectoral kind of outlook rather than emission results, because emissions here are in our BAU scenario, we do see that emissions keep on rising till 2065, 70, where they plateau and after which they start declining. But otherwise, it is for all the other scenarios, these are essentially policy-driven scenario. So the emission peaks in the given chosen peak year and goes to net zero in this particular year. I also want to emphasize this analysis focus on the energy sector alone. That does not include land use, because that's a very different kind of very different sector. And so we are focusing on energy sector, which is a bulk of India's GHG emissions. So coming to the sectors, just quickly explaining how do we read these graphs. So here we are talking about different 16 scenarios of policy scenarios. The shaded area essentially give the range for a particular technology combination. So it could be low hydrogen with CCS, low hydrogen without CCS, and four different technology combinations. And the dotted lines that you see at the top, they are essentially 2070 net zero scenarios, 2040 peak and 2070 net zero scenarios with different tech combinations. So this is what this is, and the bottom line that you see here is essentially a reference scenario line. So the first big insight is about electricity generation across scenarios. India's current electricity generation is very low given its developing economy. So even in reference scenario, it is going to expected to grow very fast. But if we look at any of these net zero scenarios, we can see the huge increase in electricity demand that will be required. As we know, electrification of end use sector is important. But what is very interesting in India's case, a lot of this is actually driven by the industrial sector, emissions, industrial sector electricity, and I'll come to that. But what does it mean? This, electricity generation. What does it mean? So first of all, it means that the total generation capacity of solar has to grow very fast. The solar is where a lot of potential in India is, and we will see that a huge increase in solar is going to happen because of this rapid electrification. But this also means that generation capacity of coal has to go down very rapidly. So what we see that around 2040 or so, in a 2070 net zero scenario, which is represented by these lines here, we do see that coal generation in India has to peak somewhere around 2040, and then has to be rapidly going down to meet the objectives of a 2070 net zero. If CCS is available, then it's a very little amount of coal is possible. It could be there in the system, but CCS is also very expensive technology, and the expectation of even solar plus battery cost, the decline is actually much more favorable as far as the India electricity generation sector goes. And same for the nuclear energy. The capacity of nuclear energy expected to grow very fast, because that is only the base load kind of technology which exists in India. And now what is happening in the transport and the industrial sector? The reference line you can see here for the electrification of transport sector, it is slowly going to be electrified in the reference scenario. But irrespective of the policy scenario, we do see we know that rapid electrification will be required, and same for hydrogen, especially in the freight segment. That is where we do see a big role of hydrogen. But the industrial sector is actually very interesting. So India's industrial energy use, the share of electricity is around 17-18%. And the reason is that there is a very interesting cross subsidy in India. Essentially, the residential sector, electricity is subsidized because energy affordability is a very important part of India's energy policy, and given it's a developing economy. So for subsidizing electricity for the residential sector, the prices for industrial sector are very high. So no business, essentially, unless it is kind of required by the technical processes of that industry, no business chooses to invest in electricity-based systems. Everybody goes for coal or oil in the Indian industrial ecosystem. Now that has to drastically change, because electrification of industry is going to be something very important part of the strategy. And industry has a huge footprint on India's emissions pie. The largest is electricity sector. Currently, it accounts for almost half of India's carbon dioxide emissions. And then it's the industrial sector, which accounts for almost 27-28% of India's emissions. So these two sectors are big, and electrification of industrial sector does mean many interesting, kind of cross subsidy or electricity pricing reforms kind of challenges in the Indian sector. We also do see uptake of hydrogen for India's industrial sector, mostly in the steel segment. That is where the particular application of hydrogen lies. So the key steps that come to our mind for a 2070 net zero scenario, when CCS might not be successful, but hydrogen is successful because a lot of investment is already happening in hydrogen. The steps are listed here. For the power sector, coal-based generation must peak by 2040 and reduce by 99% between 40 and 60. Solar-based generation capacity must increase tremendously. And so these are huge numbers, almost 5,500 gigawatts by 2070, which does mean a lot of land requirement. So that is going, we do see land as going to be an impediment. Even wind-based electricity generation has to go to almost 1,800 gigawatts, and nuclear-based electricity has to go over 200 gigawatts. The current targets of the system is around just 60 gigawatt of nuclear-based electricity. So every low carbon fuel has to grow rapidly. In the transport sector, the share of electric cars and freight trucks must reach over 80% by 2070. For other segments of transportation, the biofuel blend has to be very high, almost 84%. In the industrial sector also, because that is where a lot of coal is used, the coal use has to peak by 2040 and reduce by 97% in the next 25 years. Hydrogen share has to increase by somewhere around 19% in the next 50 years. Industrial energy intensity plays a very important role, and energy intensity of GDP must decline. Essentially, it has to double in the next 30 years, and then further increase by 30% between 2050 and 2070. Energy efficiency in the building sector is also very important, and that also has to almost double in the next next 20 years or so. Finally, the crude oil production, because India is an importing economy, oil importing economy, the crude oil production has to peak by 2040 and then decrease by 90% between 2050 and 2070. Now, these are the sectoral steps that need to be undertaken. As far as the cost to the economy goes, essentially the deadweight loss to the economy, the earlier we push the net zero target by 2040. So the peak that you are seeing in the graph, which is the policy cost graph, essentially the earlier we push the peak, the higher the impact on GDP. That is one insight. Also, the availability of CCS does matter a lot. So CCS allows for existing sectors to continue, existing investments to continue, and that is why there's a big decline in economic losses if this particular technology is available. Now coming to some other important variables, India is a water stressed nation. So water consumption is something important. Many of the inland power plants are now mandated by the government to move toward a particular low water technology. But irrespective of that move, because the electricity system is going to grow so fast, we are going to see a significant increase in water consumption requirements across all the net zero scenarios. Employment is a very good picture, in fact, especially in the power sector, because the job coefficient of solar is much higher. So that is a kind of the number of jobs that could be created, full-time equivalent is much higher across any net zero scenarios. But the land requirement is where we do see a significant impediment. Solar has a massive footprint, and the land requirement for any net zero scenario is very huge, which simply means India has to think about some sort of innovative co-location strategies, as well as think new kind of research in solar, which simply enhances the efficiency of solar cells, so that with a much lesser footprint, India is able to achieve the goals of a net zero future. Now, in terms of some interesting institutional changes that require, I'll just probably talk about two. If you look at India's current energy ecosystem, it is dominated by pretty massive public sector enterprises. And there is very little competition. For example, Coal India Limited is a monopoly supplier of coal in India. NTPC Limited, which is Thermal Power Corporation, the biggest fleet of India's coal power plant, or rather power system, is under the NTPC. Now, if we are talking about the net zero future, many of those existing, government enterprise dominance is going to reduce significantly, because the resource access, which is traditionally these public sector undertakings had, that resource access goes away if solar comes in. So we are already seeing many big, companies with deep pockets already entering India's solar manufacturing sector, be it India's big business conglomerates or even international big business houses. They've already entered India, and which simply means there will be a lot more competition in the sector. The second big thing is about power sector market design. India's most of the state energy utilities or electricity utilities are essentially state-owned, and they have, they are kind of heavily beset by challenges related to labor unions of the energy sector, and the net zero future that we are talking about is a much more sophisticated market design, and the skill set that is available in the sort of the government setup, the public sector setup, those skill sets are not very conducive to take on this kind of challenge. So a big reform which India has been trying to do for many years now, decades now, but has not been able to do because of labor unions, very powerful labor unions in the energy sector, those kind of challenges have to be taken head on. And finally, the electricity pricing structure, as I said, has to be also reformed. And that is how the industrial sector will move towards electricity. So these are only some of the reforms that are going to be critical, and some of the strategies is not just engaging with citizens, but also engaging with the energy sector workforce and labor unions, deploying low-cost finance. So even the solar sector in India faces a very high cost of finance as of now as compared to coal. All that these are real impediments, and somehow India has to find low-cost finance through either international climate finance channel. That's the only way. And then going beyond just the co-benefit narrative. The co-benefit narrative was useful, but we are increasingly thinking now that one has to think about a much more macroeconomic growth and jobs kind of narrative, which is much more successful in creating actions. Co-benefits it's a very relevant and logical kind of narrative, but at least in our experience, it has not really moved a lot of action on ground. It's only the macroeconomic benefits which have really pushed governments to move, especially the Indian government to move. So a lot of push on solar is not necessarily because of air pollution. It is because of the potential of creating domestic jobs and manufacturing capacity. And finally, pricing carbon. Yes, Gokul. Yeah.
Yeah, Vaibhav, sorry to disturb you. We are slightly over time, so I would request you to maybe just wind up with that.
Sure. So just to conclude, I mean, India has to start thinking about domestic transition, and sectoral pathways are critical. And this is what our work seeks to inform. And this modeling-based analysis is just a starting point, and it is a platform for deeper discussions. And stakeholders across sectors need to kind of reflect on these insights and have a much more deeper conversation now that the net zero has been announced, but a long-term strategy is something that needs to be devised. So I will stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Vaibhav. So I think we'll have some time for maybe a couple of questions for Vaibhav. So I don't see any hands up so far, but I do have one question for you, Vaibhav. So in this analysis, have you considered the role of CDR at all, like negative emissions? And what's your thoughts about the potential for CDR in India in the deployment around the mid-century timeframe?
Yes. So if you look at some of the scenarios, they do have CCS. So we have played on this combination of CCS and hydrogen. And we have explored these scenarios, especially I did talk about CCS, the implications on economic, the potential for continuation of fossil in the economy, as well as the cost to GDP. So CCS does play a role in all of those variables. So that is a big technology that we've explored. And also, there are some land use emissions, which negative emissions on land use, essentially due to, higher bioenergy plantations that are happening in this scenario. But yes, primarily we are focused on the energy sector in terms of our analysis. But there are going to be implications for these technology availability.
Great. Thanks, Vaibhav. Our next talk is by Ken OSHIRO from Kyoto University, and Ken will be talking about the role of hydrogen in meeting the Paris Agreement goals.
So I'd like to start my presentation on hydrogen. We focus on the role of hydrogen in the context of Paris Agreement climate goals, and this study was conducted in collaboration with Dr. Shinichiro Fujimori. So first off, as you already know, there are several mitigation options. Like here, this is IPCC SR 1.5 emission pathways. And first, negative emission is around here. And second one is energy demand reaction. And this scenario is characterized by huge energy demand reduction. And third, the demand side electrification is also the important option, especially in the energy demand sectors. As you can see, right, the share of electricity is growing in the stringent mitigation scenarios. But recently, the hydrogen and hydrogen-based energy carriers, which include ammonia and synthetic hydrocarbons, as well as hydrogen itself, is focused, but their role is not well understood. So in this study, we focused on the role of hydrogen. And in terms of the sectoral mitigation options, we need to consider the residual emission in the energy demand sectors, especially in the industry and transport sectors. They include some difficult to decarbonize sectors, which generally include the heavy industry that is associated with demand for high temperature heating. And also the transport sector includes long distance road transport, and also shipping and aviation is relatively hard to decarbonize. And this demand is characterized by the difficulties of electrifications. But the hydrogen carriers can be helpful to remove the residual emissions in these sectors. And also the hydrogen has some unique characteristics. First, it has advantage on the energy storage, especially compared with electricity. And it can, these figures are taken from recent IER reports. And the left shows the today's energy flows associated with hydrogen. And as you can see, hydrogen can be used in the various forms, such as ammonia or other liquid fuels or sometimes gases. And also, it can be used as a synthetic hydrocarbon, which is converted by hydrogen and captured CO2. And if these CO2 are captured by carbon neutral sources, such as biomass or direct air, it can be used as zero emission energy carriers. But as you can see, to convert the primary energy or electricity to hydrogen, the loss is not so small. For electricity, it is the efficiency, conversion efficiency is around 70%. So when we consider the efficiency, the direct electrification is more efficient. So, as I mentioned, the hydrogen can be helpful to remove the residual emissions, but their role is not well understood. So in this study, we aimed at exploring the role of hydrogen-based energy carriers in the context of Paris Agreement climate goals using a global energy system model. And our energy system model explicitly incorporate end-use demand technologies as well as energy supply or transport. And here, our overview of our energy system model is shown. We call it AM technology, and it is previously called AM end use. And it is a bottom-up type recursive dynamic model. And basically, it is minimize the total energy system cost by linear programming. And it has 33 regions. And also, this model is characterized by the high granularity of power sector. It considers electric dispatch by 1 hour for representative days. And in this study, we considered 3 forms of associated with hydrogen. First is hydrogen itself, and second is ammonia, and third is synthetic hydrocarbon. And hydrogen generation is derived from several energy carriers, which include electricity based on solar or wind, and fossil fuels and bioenergies. And synthetic hydrocarbon can be converted from hydrogen and captured CO2 from fossil or biomass or industry process or direct air. And these energy carriers can be used in the both energy demand and supply sectors, such as hydrogen DRI in steel making or fuel cell vehicles, or also the hydrogen power generation is included. And synthetic fuels can be used the liquid or gas use. And we tested multiple scenarios for the various climate scenarios and technology scenarios and their combination. We tested for climate scenario, we prepared baseline and 2 degrees and 1.5 degrees scenarios. And in terms of technology scenario, we prepared 5 scenarios, and they are characterized by the, for example, the DAC low is DAC cost is decreases, and CCS off is CCS is unavailable. And in bio scenarios, dedicated purpose-grown energy crop cannot be used. And in the H2 low scenarios, in these scenarios, we consider the hydrogen cost decreases. So we simulated 15 scenarios in total, and time horizon is by 2050. And this is the first result, and left-hand side shows the carbon dioxide emissions, and on your left, final energy demand. And as you can see, in the 1.5 degree scenarios and 2 degree scenarios without CCS, you can see the reduced residual emissions, especially in the transport sector. And in these scenarios, you can see the upscaling of hydrogen, as shown here, and the share of hydrogen, and which includes synthetic fuels, reached up to 10% of final energy consumption in 2050. And this slide shows the sector-wise details of hydrogen penetration. And as you can see, hydrogen is consumed mainly in industry and transport sectors. But by contrast, in building sectors, electrification is a major mitigation options. And also in the transport sector, you can see the introduction of synthetic hydrocarbon, because in these sectors, these fuels are used for shipping or aviation as their low carbon fuels. And yes, but time is approaching, so I'll skip this slide. And here is the energy sources for hydrogen production. And on your left, the energy sources of hydrogen is shown. And as you can see, the electricity is a main source of hydrogen, and they are mainly provided by renewable energies or CCS. So hydrogen is entirely decarbonized by 2050. And here you can see the hourly profile of power generation and hydrogen generation. And the hydrogen is mainly comes from solar PV. And okay, I'll skip this slide. And here's a discussion, and we confirmed in this study that the hydrogen can play a role to remove residual emission, but it is limited in the specific conditions such as limited CCS or very stringent decarbonization scenarios. But by contrast, we confirmed electrification is commonly used, and it is important options. And here is the limitation and the caveats. And as a conclusion, we want to stress that the policy design is important, not only focusing on hydrogen, but also considering electrification or various energy sources. Yeah, thank you. That's all for my presentation.
I can see one question for you, Ken, from Takuyahara. Did you evaluate the cost of renewable hydrogen?
Yes, I did, and it is not so cheap, and around doubled compared to electricity. So because the efficiency is 70%, and also the initial cost for electrolyzer is needed, so it is doubled by electricity price itself. All
right. So I think we can move on to the next talk now. Thanks again, Ken.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Keigo AKIMOTO from RITE, Japan. And Keigo will be talking about pathways to carbon neutrality in the transport sector.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Keigo AKIMOTO from Research Institute of Innovative Technology for the Earth, RITE. I'd like to talk about the pathways to carbon neutrality in transportation sector. Electric vehicles, synthetic fuels, or fossil fuels with negative emission technologies. My study focus will be similar to the previous speaker, OSHIRO-san. I would like to start. So first, I would like to show you the outlook of global CO2 emissions by sector, by IEA net zero emission scenarios by 2050, NZT, and also the scenarios of IAM in the IPCC SR15. In the NZT scenario by IEA, the emission offset by carbon dioxide removal is about 1 gigaton CO2 per year in 2050. On the other hand, the most of the scenario analysis by the IAMs, which are submitted to the IPCC SR15, assume large amounts of negative emissions by CDR, such as BECS, except in the P1 scenario, that is the LED scenario. But after the IPCC SR15 in 2018, the contributions of DEX deployments have been also evaluated as a CDR in addition to DEX. So this is the IEA NZT scenarios for the transportation sector. The left-hand side figure shows the final energy consumption in transport sector. As you can see here, rapid decrease in the fossil fuels and the rapid increase in electricity consumption. And the right-hand side figure shows the share of the BEV, plug-in hybrid, and fuel cell vehicles into total car sales and stocks. As you can see here, almost 100% of new car sales of passenger cars of electric vehicles can be estimated in this scenario. But, oh, sorry. Oh. This is the, this is the carbon neutrality in the transportation sector image. We have several kinds of mitigation scenarios in the transportation sector. For example, even if we use the hybrid vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles, we have also opportunity to offset by using negative emission technologies that such as BECS and DEX. And also we have synthetic fuel options also. So there are several kinds of options for carbon neutrality, and the BECS VEP is not the sole option for the carbon neutrality. Higher cost-effective measures should be conducted, including the transition terms. So I'd like to, this study used the integrated assessment model, DNA21 plus model. This model is a linear programming model. Optimize the world energy system cost between 2000 and 2100, and we have disaggregated regions and technology-rich models. So we assume the several kinds of scenarios for evaluation of the emission reductions measures in road transportation sectors, not only for the transportation sector, but including energy supply side measures. So, for example, we have several kinds of scenarios, model difference and low cost of electric vehicles scenarios, low cost of renewable energy, no improvement direct air capture, limited biomass, and limited CO2 storage, and low cost of EV and trucks. So, under these scenarios, we assume the emission pathways for the 1.5 degrees scenarios. So this is the assumptions for the renewable energies of solar PV and wind power. We have two kinds of scenarios, conservative emission reduction scenarios and low-cost renewable energy scenarios. And also we have there are several kinds of scenarios on electric vehicles, as you can see here, low-cost EV scenarios, rapid cost reductions, BEV scenarios, and low-cost fuel cell vehicle scenarios. So I'd like to show you some results, some model results. This is a number of car owned. So as you can see here, model different scenarios, low cost EV, low cost renewable energy scenarios, and rapid cost reductions of BEV, low cost of FCV. In the model reference scenarios, even for 1.5, major cost-effective options are estimated to be hybrid and plug-in hybrid vehicles by 2050, thanks to the contributions of CDR such as DEC and BECS. The stock share of passenger cars of BEV remains about 70 to 80% of total number of cars owned in 2050, even under the scenarios of rapid cost reductions of BEV. So this is a global emissions by sector. For net zero CO2 emissions in the world, CDR such as DEX, BECS, and deforestation will contribute to offsetting the residue emissions of non-CO2, GHG process CO2, and other energy-related CO2, and achieving the target more economically, as you can see here. So this slide shows the global final energy consumption in transportation sector. In the different scenario, large amounts of fossil fuels in transportation sector remain even in 2050 is thanks to the direct air capture and BECS options. The estimated cost-effective options in automobiles are mainly hybrid vehicles and plug-in hybrid vehicles with offset of the negative emission technologies. If we assume several constraints of BECS and DEX and rapid cost reductions in BEV, the IM shows relatively similar energy consumption in transportation sector to that of IYER and ZTE scenario. So, but this is a carbon prices scenarios for by DNA 21 plus and IEA NZT, and also as you can see here, IPCC SR15. Our model analysis shows higher carbon prices compared to the NZT, but almost similar ranges of the SR15 reports. When CDR such as BECS and DEX constraints, the carbon prices greatly increase under the net zero emission target. The prices of NZT scenario are relatively low compared with those of scenarios without considerations of large amounts of CDR, particularly of DEX. So finally, I would like to conclude, electrification is a key measure for achieving carbon neutrality. Shifts from ICE vehicles to electric vehicles are also very important options. On the other hand, CDR such as DEX and BECS will contribute to offsetting the residue emissions of fossil fuels also in transportation sector. In addition, synthetic fuels based on renewables will play a certain role to achieve carbon neutrality in transportation sector. The assessments of total energy systems in energy supply, transport, and CDR are important cost-effective emission reduction measures. Only BEV will not be a dominant measure in road transportation sector. Several kinds of road transport measures have potential cost-effective reductions in different time points, different countries, and different perspectives in technologies. It will be better to keep several options also. several options in the transportation sector as well as in all sectors in order to increase achieving probability of carbon neutrality. Thank you very much.
So the last presentation for this morning is by Vahid from Energy Policy and Modeling Group, University College Cork. Vahid will be talking about transition pathways in Ireland, and with a particular focus on passenger light-duty vehicles. So Vahid, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Good morning or good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vahid ARYANPUR, a PhD student from University College Cork, and the title of my presentation is Transition Pathway to a Carbon Neutral Energy System in Ireland with a special focus on passenger light-duty vehicles. Before starting, I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues in UCC. You can see the core model developers, and the latest version of Times Ireland model is now publicly available through GitHub and Zenodo. And if you are curious about the sectoral results and details results, you can click on the link that I have prepared underneath of this slide. So let's have a look at the background and the scope of this research project. Transport sector in Ireland is the largest energy consuming sector, and this sector significantly relies on fossil fuels, and among different modes in transport sector, private cars are responsible for the largest share of emission. On the other hand, the government introduced the Climate Action Bill quite recently. Its ambition is to reach a carbon neutral society by 2050 and a very more ambitious target by midterm target by 2030, which is 51% reduction compared to the 2018. And at the same time, the government tried to support EV adoption by monetary incentives, and it has a great ambition of reaching 840,000 electric vehicles by 2030. That, as you can see, the current number of EV vehicles in Ireland is around 40,000. So let's have a discussion about the methodology that we have used. We have used an optimization models, including two major modules, supply side modules, as you can see, prepare different energy carriers to meet energy service demand across different sectors. A carbon constraint ensures that we will receive a carbon neutral society by 2050 across all sectors except for transportation, because we have excluded transportation from this carbon constraint. As you can see, the details of transport technologies, including different modes of transport and technologies to meet transport demand for passenger or freight. Instead of a carbon constraint, we have used different policy measures across different scenarios to answer two main questions. The first one is how these policy measures in transport sector impact decarbonization pathways in transport sector. And the second one is to know how when is the appropriate time to remove the purchase grant while meeting electric vehicle adoption target. Here, I'd like to share some more details about the transport sector. You can see the modeling framework will allow us to compare single region modeling with multi-region model. So for multi-region model, we will have region specific parameters listed here. You can see what kind of parameters we have used for each regions across 26 counties in Ireland. And I'd like to highlight two more parameters here. The first one is vehicle stock model that simulates the retirement profile of different vehicles in different regions based on the actual historical data that we have over the last 2 decades from different regions in Ireland. And in the next slide, I'd like to show how we used hurdle rates to, in fact, region-specific hurdle rates to improve the representation of consumer decisions. As you can see, each region in Ireland is characterized by average annual income from 32 to 66,000. And based on these, the regions, or it's better to say the consumers, disaggregated into three main groups. Obviously, the higher the income, the lower the discount rate they will receive. And this figure shows that, for example, about 1/3 of total consumers will receive a discount rate of about 40%, while I should mention that the social discount rate in our model is around 4%. Here, I'd like to share the main scenarios that we have defined. You can see that we different measures, the carbon tax, biofuel obligation schemes, active modes, and two main sensitivity cases, including occupancy rate from 10% to 70%, and monetary incentive removal scenarios in different years are used. And then we have checked how those measures individually or in combination can impact on emission reduction. The results of emission reductions here in this figure are shown. First of all, you can see the actual emission in 2018 versus the target, very ambitious target in 2030. And here you can see how different policy measures individually or in combined can reduce the emission. The key points here that you should consider for these modelings is that running these scenarios have no monetary incentives. So EV adoption is around much less than the target that we have in, 330,000 electric vehicles. So we can conclude from these figures that from this comparison, individual measures cannot significantly reduce the emissions, and all of those measures without policy, without monetary incentives, including improved shift and carbon tax, just contribute to 31% of total reduction, and it shows that we need additional policy measures to reduce emission. Here, see the comparison of EV adoption in different scenarios, a reference case versus different monetary incentive removal scenario. For example, this scenario shows if we keep purchase grants and the vehicle registration tax relief for EV electric vehicle buyers until the end of 2022 and etc. So this line also shows the target, and the early removal, as you can see, may result in significant gap between the target and the penetration of electric vehicles. And on the other hand, you can see that the higher the penetration of electric vehicles will radically reduce the CO2 emissions, but even the comparison between the target and the emission reduction shows that monetary incentives applied individually are unlikely to achieve the national decarbonization target, because the government cannot keep these monetary incentives until the end of the century to reach these targets. And here I'd like to share more results of comparison between single region versus multi-region energy system modeling. As you can see, there is a divergence between the results. The key reason for this divergence is the averaging process that we have in single region modeling, because it can hide the tendency of high income or high or to medium income groups to purchase electric vehicles, and also average retirement profile is another potential source of divergence. On the other hand, this divergence will change, will impact on supply side, and a higher spatial resolution, in fact, can better inform policymakers. Here you can see that in multi-region modeling framework, we need about 20-25% higher electricity consumption. So energy producers and policymakers should know that how much electricity really they need to meet the actual demand over the next decade. And as the final result slide, I'd like to show the spatially resolved modeling frame distribution of electric vehicles in two different scenarios. In both scenarios, the majority of electric vehicles is adopted by the major demand centers in the eastern counties. Moreover, a higher household income in these counties leads to more electric vehicle adoption. It also shows that number of electric vehicles in lower income regions significantly increases with monetary incentives, while the higher income regions do not impact, do not experience radical change. In fact, this may call for more targeted subsidy program to reduce burden on low income regions or consumers. And finally, as the conclusions, I'd like to discuss the impact of different policy measures on decarbonization. As you can see, individual measures, even the radical ones, cannot meet the ambitious target. The second point is that without demand side strategies, I mean, the controlling the level of private car-based mobility, the mitigation goals seems to be unachievable. And the last point from this part is to reach the ambitious goals, financial EV incentives might be kept until the mid-2020s for the case of Ireland. And finally, I'd like to share some modeling insights. A spatially resolved model can help energy policy makers to think about subnational distribution of recharging stations and power grid development. They can help us to incorporate consumer heterogeneity. And finally, as to know about the computational tractability of higher spatial resolution model, I'd like to share this issue that a multi-regional model is run in 30 minutes, but for a single region is 6 minutes, that both cases are acceptable on a laptop. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing your comments and feedback.
Thanks a lot, Vahid, and to all of our presenters this morning. I guess one question I would have is, so you have used a model with subnational detail for Ireland. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, great. But I'm curious to know, does that model also have some detail outside of Ireland, or is it just a model focused on Ireland only?
The focus is on Ireland, but on different regions in different counties. So we have used region-specific parameters to characterize each region, including the demand, the existing infrastructure, retirement profile, and specific hurdle rates, and etc.